Hi,
Hi,
Rebecca.
everyone.
Welcome back. We missed you.
Oh, thanks. It's nice to be back.
Doobie is never back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm excited about tonight. I mean, this is one of my more favorite articles that you craft for Laughing Place every year, because I always find I'm introduced to some new names that maybe I hear, but I don't really pay a lot of attention to. And then, as luck would usually have it, some point in the next year, they are much more in the forefront of activity. And so I'm grateful to already have had an introduction to them through your fascinating people collection.
Yeah, so, I try and pick people who have had an impact on Disney in the last year and are perceived to have an impact moving forward. They're not necessarily household names. They're not, especially this year where there wasn't a lot of content. They're not necessarily like movie stars or things like that, but people who have maybe risen in importance, maybe a little bit underneath the radar. This year's a little different, and we'll get to that in a little bit regarding that. But, I just want to pick some people that I feel like have made an impact to Disney, not necessarily positively or negatively, but just they indicate a decision, where the company's headed to in the future. So the way it's gonna work, we're gonna do 9 of the people, and then we'll pick our person of the year at the end. We'll reveal it. So the 9 will be alphabetical, because there's no ranking, and I don't, because that'd be too hard and insulting to people. And then we'll pick our person of the reveal our person of the year. So let me just get that going. If the button worked.
You got it. If not, I've got it sitting right here.
I got it right.
Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
So this is Dr. Jennifer Ashton, and she is ABC News's chief medical contributor. And obviously, medical news is important in 2020. And not only did she have to pivot from the traditional, Good Morning America news correspondent, where it's like, what should I feed my baby? Or, what should I have a screening every 3 years or every 4 years or things like that? Not obviously everything medical is important, but a more of, I would say softer side of medicine.
More health lifestyle.
Yeah. And, and that's what she's kind of known for. She's a very talented doctor in her own right, but she specializes in obesity medicine and early child development, stuff that would appeal to sort of that 7 to 9 Monday through Friday audience. But then you get full on pandemic. And so next thing you know, she's at the, Institute of Health interviewing Dr. Anthony Fauci on, the leader of infectious diseases. She has to parsec news from the World Health Organization and really big news stories because COVID-19, was, in a year of many news stories, is obviously the most in everyone's lives on a daily basis. And she even got promoted in a way to be to get a spotlight with a new show called GMA3 What You Need to Know, which started off as COVID-19 What You Need to Know. And what happened is a couple of years ago, Good Morning America expanded with Michael Strahan and Sarah Hines. It's sort of like a Regis Kathy Lee expansion of Good Morning America. It was pre-recorded. It was the talk show. They'd have celebrity guests, musical guests, like, kind of like a typical afternoon talk show. And then eventually added Keke Palmer. And as the pandemic came and they realized, doing that kind of show is hard in a pandemic, they transitioned it to a show about the pandemic, which kind of expanded into a more broad-based news show. So they still have guests, but they're more newsy guests, mayors, senators, things like that. And Dr. Jennifer Ashton comes on every day to give us not only the update on the latest on the pandemic, but other important health stories that might be coming to top of mind, such as how delaying medical procedures during the pandemic could affect you. And so, to me, these are one of those jobs that where, you probably work a couple hours a day on this during a normal time. And then next thing you're up 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the pandemic has lasted nearly a year. So kudos to her. And, she's been a very prevalent voice across ABC News.
Okay.
Next, we have in alphabetical order, Rebecca Campbell. So she is one or two people on this list that actually was on the list last year, because we thought they were going to have a job and leave a mark. And then they got two dramatically different yet very important jobs. And Rebecca Campbell was briefly president of the Disneyland Resort and was named chairman of Disney's direct-to-consumer and international business once Kevin Mayer left. And then later on, when Kareem Daniel came on, her job changed once again a little bit. But she is basically in charge of all their Disney's international efforts outside of parks, as well as the day-to-day management of Disney streaming services, so that ESPN Plus, Disney Plus, and Hulu. And so she started off working in ABC-owned television station in Philadelphia, but then rose the ranks, eventually leading all of ABC's owned channels, and is now led the European, Middle East, Africa, commonly called EMEA, and then was there for a little bit under Kevin Mayer, then went to the Disneyland Resort to lead that business. Disneyland shut down, and they made Rebecca leading this business. And if you saw the Investor Day, she's known to be smart, nimble, very focused on the employee experience. And she's a Bob Chapek and Kareem Daniel, who we'll get to in a little bit, are sort of, I think, Bob Chapek's mentees in many ways. And I see, he's known to not make that is the sole decision making. If you can't cut it, you can't cut it. But it seems like she's been given a great opportunity to lead the streaming business as it becomes a more and more important part on the non-content side. So, we thought she was going to leave a legacy at Disneyland, and she did during the sort of initial closure period. But quickly, it became clear that she's going to be the person that is figuring out how to roll out Disney Plus across the world. And I think one of the nuanced things that you saw from her was, there's a difference between Star and Star Plus, depending on where you live. You're not just going to roll out Star across the world. If you're in America, you don't get it at all. And then if you are in a country where ESPN has a strong presence, you'll do Star Plus and combine that with Star to create a service. Otherwise, Star will become a part of Disney Plus, which is a different way, depending on where you live. And that kind of nuance, I think you're seeing not always be applied across the entertainment business these days, such as the Time Warner announcement AT&T's announcement that all the Warner Brothers movies for 2021 are just going to go to streaming just because that seemed like a good time. Let's just make it the whole year. So, I think she will be a talented executive. She's one to watch in terms of increasing her presence moving forward as well.
Well, I'm excited for her movement to the streaming universe. I do miss her Instagram because when she was at Disneyland Resort, her Instagram was rather dynamic, and it just was one of those where it was. So I enjoy when the executives look like they appreciate us fans and also their cast members with some of the kind of insider experiences, or just making it seem like they enjoy their day at work. That it's not a humdrum 9 to 5.
And what I think the Disneyland experience gave to her was an appreciation for Disney as a brand and as a history and heritage part of the business. She isn't, coming from ABC television, that's not where the Disney magic lives and breathes. But, I think she always loved Disney as a company, just like everyone who doesn't work for Disney loves Disney. And seeing the emotional investment of the cast members, even when she went to direct to consumer, I heard her talk about how much that had an impact on her, and that the love of what they do was really an inspiration. And, and that's not someone said, "What did you learn from Disney?" It was a softball question. She actually came, that came from her own heart. And I'm excited to see, when Disney Plus is such an important part, I'm glad they're keeping the Disney in it, and it's not just going to become a spreadsheet kind of operation.
That is a nice outcome of these kind of shifting among divisions and among regions of the Disney kind of body, is that you get to see that kind of infuse different perspectives into the different operating arms. Like you're saying, ABC is not where your heart necessarily is going to be coming, but so it's nice that she's had that parks experience, and now she'll bring that to her streaming decision making.
Next, we have Josh D'Amaro. When we last talked, he was president of Walt Disney World briefly after being president of Disneyland. And he got promoted to run Disney's parks, experiences, and products business after Bob Chapek got promoted. And what I find interesting about him is, initially he was, his mission when he first came into the role was investing in the cast experience. Now, obviously, the pandemic came quickly after that, and he wasn't able to execute on that strategy because the parks weren't open. But you can get the sense that, it breaks his heart that they had to make the tough decisions they did, but that he's excited to welcome everyone back and move ahead into a bold future. And I think if there's a theme of everyone this year, it's that their willingness to dream big, whether it's investing big on Disney Plus or even on the park side, chomping at the bit, ready to do the next big idea, whether it's Galactic Star Cruiser or who knows what. I mean, he even said, hey, if we're doing space tourism, why are we not in that conversation? But he also took a unique position to challenge the political establishment in California regarding the opening of Disneyland. Now, in the end, it sort of, as the cases rose again, it sort of went into, a moot point in the time we're now. But it's rare to see a Disney executive challenge the state, whatever state that is, to change their policy in an effort to bring back their employees. And whether it's not the conversation about who's right, who's wrong, because that's not anything I would be an expert in, but it was unique to see him willing to go out on that limb when most of the time Disney is considered a very soft company when it comes to their relationships with governmental officials.
I know that, and in a lot of other discussions I heard, there was respect given to him for his example throughout the times of COVID, and not only in what you're talking about with the way that he spoke towards the decisions, but also his willingness to be visible and accessible, like at Downtown Disney, in the early days of its reopening and things like that. And I know his Instagram, he seems to try to kind of keep bringing that light, that encouragement. I don't know. I feel like he's somebody who, as a cast member, I feel like he's kind of like on my side. Like he's working towards bringing me back. I get that feeling from some of the cast members I know.
Yeah, and obviously having to let people go is not going to win you a lot of favors.
Right.
But I think he won some brownie points for being willing to face the music. It's not just when they were reopening, but when they were just to announce the layoffs, he was willing to get yelled at essentially. Mm-hmm. And it's there was something about him where people thought it was authentic.
Yeah,
and,
I was going to say
executives are not known for being great actors, and so I think it's easy to say, oh, they shouldn't let anyone go, but that's not going to happen. That's not realistic, and that's just no other organization didn't let anyone go. But the way he did it and the way he was willing to accept it was, I think, quite frankly, made me excited for when we exit this whole time and when people come back. Now, granted, some people are not going to come back. They'll move on to other things, or their position or their isn't necessary in the new world. But Disney parks will employ more people in 10 years than they employed before the pandemic. And I think there's been a lot of focus on the content side about how they're dreaming big, but I think I think based on his IAPA presentation, I'm excited for what happens when Josh is able to, when the shackles are off and he's able to say, okay, everyone's back. We're back in business. What's next?
Mm-hmm.
So next we got Kareem Daniel, who was the other person who was on the list last year because he was just named as chairman or leading the publishing, consumer products, and games business. And it was pretty clear that he was one of Bob Chapek's mentees and disciples. As soon as Bob Chapek was named head of the company, Kareem also became chief of staff, which is kind of like your buddy, while also continuing to lead the consumer products business as it separated itself from Imagineering. But they quickly, he became chairman of Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution, DMED, and is now in charge of all the profit and loss for all non-park businesses. And Kareem has followed Bob across the company ever since he was an intern, and Bob mentored him as an intern. Because of that, it's hard to really put a finger on his style, his performance, but you do take that if he hasn't, if Bob Chapek hasn't lost faith in him over the last 20 years, probably not going to start today. And, he is taking all the, what I would consider not fun parts of the entertainment business, distribution, ad sales, and letting the entertainment folks focus on creating content, which is, it's a new way of looking at things, but he's got a tough job because when you're the one managing the profit and loss, it's pretty easy to hold you accountable. It's less easy to hold you accountable when you're like, oh, did you make good movies? Well, that's subjective, and especially with, they're theatrical and Disney Plus, it's not as easy to say great, bad. And it's also more cyclical. So he's got a tough job ahead of him, but, he's one to watch out for, as being the next generation of, he could be CEO of the Walt Disney Company if Bob Chapek continues to support him moving forward.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I'm excited, like you say, to kind of get a better feeling of his handprints, being more directly able to see what his vision, what his particular decision-making style is. So, yeah. Time will tell, huh?
Next, we got Lindsey Davis, and Lindsey Davis has been with ABC News for a while, but she has led their ABC News Live Prime news broadcast, which is an hour twice an evening on their ABC News Live streaming service. And they launched essentially in this new robust form at the beginning of the year. And her and Tom Yamos were the faces of the organization. But she's really taken on an increased role as news has become unexpectedly important in 2020. And she's able to anchor a broadcast that is sort of the anti-cable news. When they launched, they said, news context analysis, straightforward, no screaming. And if you watch cable news, there's a lot of opinion not based on logic, just opinion to have an opinion. They treat it more like First Take than a news program. Mm-hmm. And, she's able to showcase her interview skills because in the hour-long format, she's able to do some fairly in-depth interviews with experts in fields, that you may or may not agree with, but she's able to really show that, actually digging into the questions is actually more important than pontificating on answers. The other thing that's interesting is ABC News, because of the partnership with Hulu, ABC News Live is available to so many people that this is probably the future of the news division. We talk about what the future of sports is, which is the other live broadcast that people care about. But with news, they were able to pivot from basically thinking of doing new documentaries and things to being basically a 24-hour news channel without the ratings pressure of a cable news where you need to attract angry people to make money. So she's been able to, all the things that have been important this year, the election, the pandemic, the social justice experience. It's been so important that even Kelly Campbell brought up ABC News Live in her Hulu presentation at the Investor Day. So it'll be interesting to see not only her rise throughout the ABC News organization, but the role of ABC News Live moving forward as they continue to invest in streaming. It's sort of the fourth streaming service that nobody talks about, but is actually generating decent returns.
Okay.
And
once again, when it comes to Lindsey, I would suggest looking up her Instagram. I found her Instagram delightful insight into her family as well, and those types of things. They kind of get me in the heart, and very much enjoyed what I discovered looking over her Instagram.
So much like Dr. Jennifer and Ashton, Dr. Pam Hymel has been leading Disney Parks' medical operation for a decade, but I think this year she took on new importance that she had no anticipation of, in such as coming up with the new guidelines to operating the theme parks, mask wearing and distancing and testing and all those things that have had to happen. So she was one of the key architects in this whole strategy, despite the fact that she was more worried about first aid and cast health and up until March. So she seemed to rise to the occasion. I think the success of not having any major outbreaks tied to any Disney park around the globe is, basically the best way to judge their efforts. Mm-hmm. And so, she received an award, earlier this year for her efforts in this. But, my heart really goes out to her, in that, it's not many times that you wake up one day and find out your job is infinitely more important than it was the day before. And now you're, not only you have a lot of work to do, but in many ways you have to become a public face to address questions of the medical situation.
Yeah. And there's so many levels to it, especially right now with some of the information shifting as we learned more because of the nature of the it being a new disease to us. But then the one thing that I sometimes forget is there's this balance of this medical safety and operational safety, because you have to keep that in mind as well. How do we ensure that the cast members can still do their job in a safe way? Not just from this COVID, but I mean, just as far as it hampering them from doing what they're supposed to be doing without that, that kind of thing. So it's just very interesting, all the different levels that they've had to evaluate.
Yeah. And I don't know there's much more to say than that, but I hope she's able to take a long deserved vacation by the end of the 2021.
Yep. For sure.
Next, over on ESPN, we got Steve Levy, who's been with the ESPN for nearly 30 years, but was recently named, I guess at the beginning of the season, the new play-by-play commentator for Monday Night Football. And what I find funny is he was one of the people that was able to move from XFL to Monday Night Football, unlike many players. And there's been a struggle ever since the sort of Mike Tirico, John Gruden days of trying to get a Monday Night Football booth that ESPN felt comfortable with. There's been a lot of changeover, and he with the NFL rights coming up, there's been a renewed pressure to have a booth that ESPN's proud of, because there's a thought that maybe that could impact where the NFL is willing to put their major rights. If there's talk of like, shouldn't NFL get better game? Should Monday Night Football get better game matchups? Well, if they're not having the top tier booth, should they? And those are, I don't know if that should be the NFL's biggest worry, but they've been really trying to find a group that works for them. And so I don't know what, I'm not one to watch Monday Night Football for the broadcast booth. I watch it for the game. The game's interesting to me. I'll watch it, or if the Muppets are on. But
or a Star Wars trailer.
Right, exactly. But it's nice to see someone who's given so much time to the organization get a shot at their marquee franchise. And because to me he's always been known more as a hockey guy, because he's always the guy they bring, the Stanley Cup Finals, him and Barry Rose and all that. So, but we'll see what happens next season, and we'll see what happens with the NFL rights to see if Steve keeps the job, because it's sort of like the Murphy Brown secretary at ESPN.
Well, and we also have ESPN going through kind of this reshaping of sorts anyway, with losing a lot of their, I don't know, I want to say like true journalist kind of, and more focus on, like you were saying, more focus on the game itself. And then I feel like they've been really heavily embracing the former athlete broadcaster, and that's making up a number of their spots now.
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to chase the Tony Romos of the world, which was sort of I think people might be overvaluing his trend as much as he's just exceptional. Like, I don't think John Madden is John Madden. That doesn't mean every former coach of the Raiders should be in the broadcast booth.
Right.
Although John Gruden did well. But I think you're right. Whereas live sports are becoming more important to ESPN. That's why they're trying to get more NFL. There's talk of them getting hockey, trying to get better baseball rights, better games, if less of them, but more important games. And so, then play-by-play becomes important. And especially when I think we're going to see more and more games where the play-by-play guy is nowhere near the game site.
Mm-hmm.
Monday Night Football is not an example of that, but there's plenty of, I would say, mid-tier, even NBA games that will have remote broadcasts. I mean, even the Christmas broadcast this year. And if there's a lot of mid-tier sports, and it might make more sense for those, not the big game, not the game of the week or anything like that, but just produce it remotely in order to save money. Because remember, ESPN's gone from 100 million households to 80 million households. That money's got to come from someplace.
The hard part in talking about Steve Levy and the Monday night booth is that this year's broadcast, obviously, they're doing the social distancing, and that I mean, that'll really mess with your camaraderie, your chemistry. I mean, I've noticed it with some of the booths that they've been together for a long time, and yet you can tell this kind of palpable difference because of it. And so I'm really interested to see what it'll be like, kind of once that type of dynamic is no longer a part of the situation as well.
Yeah, in my opinion, sports future should be determined by this year.
Right?
I mean, it's undoubtable to be that they're firing NCAA coaches this year, and you're like they couldn't recruit. They could. I mean, what,
right?
But what do I know?
Exactly. but I hear you. It's like, wait. need a reset, need a redo.
Right. Like I feel like even with the Angels, who I love, when they fired their GM, it's like, is this really, when players are opting out, and is that the GM's fault, or is that just COVID's fault?
Right. Oh well.
So next we got Dan Scanlon, and he directed Onward for Disney Pixar, which obviously was the canary in the coal mine of Disney media distribution, where it came out at the beginning of March, and then it's hard to tell how it performed because it was kicked out of movie theaters. Essentially, they brought it to Disney Plus early, but he is known. I think he's going to be that next generation of Pixar, among several other people. But he's the way that they have him front and center, almost a second to Pete Docter. With he had an episode of Inside Pixar focused on him, and I think it's appropriate. His movie was called Onward. Because it seems like after a run of sequels and many prominent Pixar folks leaving, 25 years is a long time to be making movies in one place. He's really about the future, and to do it in such a personal movie which is basically about how his dad died when he was a kid and didn't know him, which is the plot of Onward. I think is almost like a movie. He's finally getting a chance to make a movie that is personal to him. And when you have new talent coming up that he's a part of, but also mentoring, I think you're going to see a lot of new voices. If there was a criticism of Pixar, it might've been that all the movies seemed the same. And while I don't think they want to lose their aesthetic, I think you're going to see a lot more diversity in tone and storytelling than you did move ahead, as we I think you can see with Luca being Red, and even Lightyear, which is a new take on Buzz Lightyear, trying to balance the Pixar legacy and not ruin their culture, but also find new ways to tell stories. And I think Dan Scanlon is an embodiment of that. And I'm kind of curious to see what his next movie is, because it seems like he's going to be at Pixar for the long haul. And then finally, Dan Slott. So if you watch Marvel 616, there's basically an episode about him using the Marvel method. And for those that you don't know, the Marvel method is basically the writer will write what happens in the comic book, send it to the artist. The artist will draw it, leave the word bubbles out. Then the author will come back and fill in the word bubbles, giving the artist a little bit more freedom to come up with how to paste the page. It kind of stems from when Stan Lee was writing so many comic books, he didn't have time to write them in the traditional manner. Not many people use this because it puts a lot of burden on the artist. But Dan, since he's been working at Marvel Comics since 1991, is one of the people who does use it. But there was an episode of Marvel 616 that was all about him using the Marvel method, as well as he appeared on The Big Fib, which is a Disney Plus game show. And the idea is they bring out one expert and someone pretending to be an expert. Now, if you read comic books and they say, here's the comic expert, and one of the people is Dan Slott, okay, you kind of figure out who the winner, who the fibber is and who's telling the truth. But so I thought that was like, it's Dan Slott because he writes Amazing Spider-Man. He's known for his 10-year run on Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh, wow.
And this year, he did a Fantastic Four, and he had a story on Iron Man, which the Marvel 616 episode's about, called Iron Man 2020, which takes a plot point from long ago when they thought 2020 was far enough in the future, and then brings it back now because it was one of those in the future in 2020 something crazy is going to happen. He was like, well, we're in 2020, so it kind of had to be published this year. He also led their Empire event with Al Ewing. So in a year where comics were very disjointed, Dan Slott did have a big presence, and he's currently working on the Fantastic Four and a big sort of what appears to be a long form story in that. It's one of the top selling Marvel comics at this point. And with the Fantastic Four movie coming up, it's bound to be an important title of Fantastic Four. It's a title that kind of got canceled because people weren't reading it, despite the fact it started the Marvel Universe. But Dan's been able to reinvigorate it. Just like his 10-year run on Spider-Man was, magnificent. People hated him, but it was great. What's also fun about Dan is he's willing to be the punching bag for fans. He's willing to go on social media. Even the episode of Marvel 616, it kind of put this comics, the big delay is because Dan can't meet deadlines and all this. But part of that was a little ballyhoo about making it an exciting story in and of itself. As many people on Twitter said, it's like there's never been a comic that hasn't raced to the deadline. So, he's willing to kind of embrace a little bit of that Stan Lee engaging in fans and a little bit of showmanship as well, which is kind of the hallmark of Marvel history.
I think it's well demonstrated by his pinned tweet, which reads, "My Twitter account gets 12.5% of its traffic from people snitch tagging posts where someone's left the hyphen out of Spider-Man. I've done that."
Yep. It was funny. I'm not going to rat someone out, but the Spider-Man hyphen is like saying Disneyland has like 70 rides. Like it's just one of those cultural things. That's how you know you're a fan, is if you use the word attraction. It's kind of like in Spider-Man, if you don't use the hyphen, it's pretty much a dead giveaway.
I think he gives a bit of a wink to that by the fact that he uses the animated series that was not hyphenated, the picture where he has the camera and it's not hyphenated. Yeah.
So that's our 9 most fascinating people. I'm gonna say the 10th, our person of the year. You can do the drum roll, but it's pretty. It's when I gotta say, if you ever want to bet on who Time Magazine is going to pick for person of the year, if it's an election year, it's whoever won the presidency or some derivative of that. And you got to pick the guy who was named the CEO of the Walt Disney Company when you're picking a person of the year for 2020. The guy who has the worst timing in the world, Bob Chapek.
Oh, boy.
Who, it's interesting. If I was a betting man, I would have said there's no way, especially with Disney Plus being so important, they would pick someone from parks to be the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. But Bob Iger has moved people around. He had that infamous switcheroo with Jay Rizzullo and Tom Staggs. So it's clear, and I don't disagree with him, that you want to get the right person. You can teach him media. You can teach him how to make a movie, but you can't teach him how to make good decisions and prioritize in the right way and all those sort of leadership skills that so many people don't have. So Bob Chapek, named CEO in March, was upped to the was I shouldn't say up to, but was added up to the board of directors in May. So he had a rough year, I'm guessing. I mean, he had a great year, but he had a rough year. Tried to basically manage the Disney Plus expansion while also not having all the money that comes in normally from the parks business to help pay for everything. Mm-hmm. And when Bob Iger says, I want to focus on creative, this is a year where there was not a lot of creative, but there was a lot of management. And I'm sure Bob Iger helped him. Bob's not going to leave him out to dry. But, it's, to me, the fact that they've been able to manage through it, have a stock price that's higher than when the pandemic started, is impressive. And, he's been criticized in the past for being Mr. IP guy, but let's be frank, that stuff works, and his public speaking also not great. But when you looked at how he's performed at the shareholder meeting and on subsequent interviews, like on CNBC and stuff, he's definitely shown improvement. And especially when that was like my major criticism of Bob Iger when he started. And, once you get a little bit more comfortable in the role, you can afford to have people to teach you how to do that stuff. And the end, it's kind of like when you vote for president. Should you pick the guy who's great at telling you he should be president, or should you pick the guy who is better at being president? And so, when it comes to CEO, you're going to pick a guy who's better in a meeting than on TV. Not that stuff isn't important. Spreading the word is part of being a CEO. But even though when he was at the highest of his criticism, amongst the fan community, he was always ready to go to a D23, whether it be Destination D or Expo. He always interviewed with the fan media, which he didn't need to do, and answered their questions in a non-scripted way, which, shows that he cares. And you might not agree with his decisions, and that's fine. This is not a company that's going to be run by fans. It's a company that's run by business people who hopefully like the product that they're making. But, he seemed to not be able to weather the storm so far fairly well. And then the big question becomes, with Bob Iger's contract coming up at the end of 2021 and rumors that he might even join the Biden administration, if he has to take on the creative business, how's that going to play out? If the big reason Bob Iger went to become executive chairman was he felt he needed more time to focus on the creative stuff before he left. Well, is that stuff not going to take time moving forward? Is he going to designate a chief creative officer? Is he going to take it on himself? Is he going to add a president to his role, where there's someone to help him out? Bob Iger was the only person in recent memory that's been able to run this company essentially at the top by himself. And it's obviously becoming larger and larger by the day. And when you're looking at film dailies and strategy on a franchise, that takes time. But also managing a company's cash flow through a pandemic also takes a lot of time. So it'll be really interesting to see, as Bob Iger is obviously, stick a fork in me, I'm done. He's ready to move on. How will Bob Chapek handle his structure and handle the creative side of the business? He obviously had a rejigging of Disney where he separated out traditional media and created this new DMED group led by Kareem Daniel, which seems like something he came up with, or along with Bob Iger, but that was his vision. That's what he wanted to do. This wasn't an edict from Bob Iger that he was executing. And so I'm curious to see what his vision is on the creative side. If that's his vision for the distribution side, what's his vision for the creative side? And I think it'll be a fun ride. And especially as he's going to lead this company into its second century, he's going to, as Disney turns 100 in just, a matter of a couple of years, he will be front and center as, the head of that initiative, whatever that is. So as we get into, next year might be a little bit of a plant figuring it out, but the countdown to 2021 to 2024 are going to be huge for Disney. It's almost like another Disney decade crammed into 3 years. And it'll be interesting to see what he does. And, if I learn my lesson with Bob Iger, it's don't judge a CEO by what you think is going to happen, because he performed better than anyone I think could have ever dreamed. And, it'll be interesting to see what Bob Chapek does. But he will be focused on branded experiences and content. He will be IP man. And whether you like it or not, whether you think that's good or not, it's been successful for him, and he will continue doing it.
What intrigues me is that not only is it challenging to step into a new role, but he stepped into a new role in a time when it's going to look different. Once we get through this kind of odd existence that we're in right now, it's like it's going to be a different role again, because you're going to get back to operating under more of normal parameters. Right now, the parameters he's operating under are not what Iger was operating under, what any other, Disney CEO has been before. And so it'll be interesting because he had to get his feet under him in this environment, and then he'll have to, in essence, kind of do that again and help that transition and reestablishing themselves within the marketplace, within however things shake out.
Well, and to me, all of the media companies went through leadership transitions this year. Some have gone better than others. And I would venture to say Disney basically didn't. Sure, Bob Iger's taken a step back and focusing on different things, but it's not like Bob Chapek hasn't been with the company for 20 years. And, I hate to beat up our friends at AT&T, but you can see the missteps they made. You can see the missteps NBC Universal, Comcast made under their leadership changes. And not that Disney won't make mistakes, but they have this legacy of knowing what they're doing. Now, Bob Chapek might not be an expert on media and what TV has done and things like that, but he does understand. He does have people in place that have been doing this for a long time, and he's worked with them for a long time. It's not like when he's at parks, he didn't know the TV people. They were all on this, they would all be on the same team meeting together, right? I think that's why you see a little bit more nuance from him regarding Premier Access and what theatrical is going to look like. They didn't shorten the window. They didn't go straight to streaming on, promise that for 10 years. Patty Jenkins, who directed Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 1984, or is it, maybe it's Wonder Woman 84, I don't know, and was signed for Lucasfilm's Rogue Squadron, right? And they made a point that she wanted it to be theatrical. No problem, right? So now you're seeing Warner Brothers have to backpedal and saying, okay, when we make the third Wonder Woman movie, it will be theatrical, and we're promising it'll be theatrical. And, because now there's a concern that they won't, that talent will go where they're willing to release something theatrically. And quite frankly, even if you think streaming is the future and more people will see it on streaming, it doesn't cost you anything to release it theatrically. I don't think anyone's not going to sign up for Disney Plus if Rogue Squadron is only on theater, because it's part of the franchise. So they're able to do something where, okay, we can release some of the franchise on direct to consumer, whether it's Pixar, Disney, whatever, and then we can do the big stuff in theaters. And if you like Disney, if you like Marvel, if you like Pixar, you're going to do both. I call it the WWE model, right? It's like, you might have your big pay-per-views, but that doesn't mean you don't have your weekly matches on whatever channel that I don't watch the WWE, but whatever channel it's on, leading up to the big thing. And I think that's something, by having it franchise-based, you're able to do both. Say, okay, we think this movie should be forget after COVID, this movie should be theatrical release. And quite frankly, having watched Soul, it would have been so much better if we saw it theatrically.
Oh yeah.
But and that's why you hear someone like even Kareem, who's basically Bob Chapek Jr., say, we understand the value of the theater business to create franchises, because with the possible exception of Stranger Things, no franchise has ever been created on streaming. And there's something about making it an event, making it feel big, that that Disney's able to do, because they're being a little bit more, they're managing it better. They're not just doing what Wall Street tells them. And I mean, I think if you learn one lesson from Bob Iger, it's don't listen to Wall Street. I mean, because they will ask the dumbest questions, and the more you know the company, the more dumb you realize the questions are. Run the business as you should run the business, and then try and convince them that you're doing the right strategy. And that's why they have these investor days, right? And the stock, despite no change from what they're doing, no one went into the investor day at December and said, do you think they're going to invest in Disney Plus? But then when they finally explain it to these geniuses, the stock price goes through the roof, because they're not paying attention and they don't understand nuance, and they don't, it's all or nothing. And I think that's what Bob Iger saw in Bob Chapek, was a man who's able to be able to look at a sophisticated business and make sophisticated choices. You don't build the same Star Wars land at Disneyland Paris that you build at the domestic parks. And it's not just because you feel like, oh, what's one of the same? It's not cookie cutter. And Bob Chapek's ability to understand the differences between Disneyland and Disney World, I think, will show that he can understand the differences between Disney and other entertainment companies that people on the outside might not get.
Oh, and just to remind me, how long has Kareem Daniel been kind of working in conjunction with Bob Chapek? Has it been throughout most of his career at Disney?
Kareem started as an intern, and it was on Bob Chapek's radar. I don't know if he reported to Bob Chapek, or if Bob was the leader, the executive that oversaw him. Kareem then left to go to Goldman Sachs and spend some time, then came back to Disney. So he's Bob Chapek has known Kareem Daniel's entire career.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure I had that settled out correctly.
And I imagine that's one of the reasons Kareem came back, right? Kept in touch with his mentor. An opportunity came up, and Kareem jumped on it, which says something to me. Kareem's a guy who wanted to work for Disney. And that, to me, that matters. It's not just, oh, hey, I need a studio job. Okay, Warner Brothers isn't hiring. I mean, there's been plenty of that, especially on the film side, where they could have easily worked for, Warner Brothers or Universal, but Disney was the opening they had. So
and to me, that also says something about Bob Chapek himself, that this individual was part of an intern within his area, goes and comes back. You have to have created an environment where someone felt appreciated and as a contributor, typically for such things to occur.
So that's that. That was a marathon. Okay.
You did it.
So we always talk about what's coming up on LP. Not a lot, slow week, the Christmas week between Christmas and New Year's, but we want to invite you all to join us at 11:30 on New Year's Eve. We're going to be celebrating New Year's Eve. Just a bunch of silliness, a lot of fun. And we will just look back a little bit and probably more optimistically look forward to what 2021 will hopefully bring. But then also follow us all week for our look backs and look forwards, as one typically does at the end of the year. So then we're going to go to our picks. So highlights from last week. My pick was Jon Favreau going on Good Morning America and not making us wait too long to figure out what Book of Boba Fett was. He told us, okay, it's the next chapter of The Mandalorian, so it's coming in December. Mandalorian's gonna be, but it's not season 3 of The Mandalorian, and Pedro Pascal will still be in The Mandalorian. So I'm glad we didn't have, because I was like, oh, is this gonna wait till Disney Gallery? Is this gonna wait till the beginning of the year? I just want to know. I don't know why it matters to me, because whatever it is gonna be whatever it is. But I just wanted to know what Book of Boba Fett was, and I'm thankful to Jon Favreau for answering that over the weekend.
I am torn. There were a number of wonderful things I felt this past week. Let's see. I will say that my runner-up is the Happy in the Holiday song by the Disney Channel crew. Yeah, it was just all over everywhere I turned. I felt like I was getting smacked in the face with it, but I liked it, so it wasn't so bad. I didn't mind that I was hearing it for the 15th time. But ultimately, I would have to settle on the Mandalorian Gallery. That was really, I know, I really loved it. I love the scene with George Lucas holding Grogu. I love this all the talk about Ahsoka and how important it was to them to realize her authentically in comparison to what Dave Filoni had crafted for the Clone Wars. So yeah, I very much enjoyed the behind the scenes. I was disappointed it's a single rather than a series. I would like more, but I'm okay. It's okay.
I would like one of my highlight for Disney Gallery Mandalorian was Dave Filoni talking Jon Favreau out of using McClunky in that first episode of the second season when he shot out the light.
Okay, I honestly couldn't tell if that was one of those just two guys having a ridiculous chat where both of them realized it wouldn't actually happen, but it was still a fun chat to have.
But then at the end of the season, it comes out, and you're like, oh, John been waiting all year to say McClunky.
Right.
And
he found a way to work McClunky in somehow, right? I just love the fact that they embrace the whole ridiculousness of McClunky. So that makes me happy too. So, it is what it is. So what are you looking forward to this week, Ben?
So, as I said, it's a quiet week. I am looking forward to new episodes of Earth to Ned, but I'm most excited for finding out what our team picked for the top 21 things they're looking forward to in 2021. We have a very diverse team in many ways in terms of interests. And to me, it's always fascinating. Someone's number one pick is someone else's not even rating pick. And you learn a lot about now we won't reveal what everyone picked, but behind the scenes, I'm able to see who voted for what and what kind of priority they gave it. And it gives you deep insight into their personalities and interests. And it's kind of amazing that no one has yet been lost their job because of how they rated something.
I'll out myself. I don't think I had I think all of the Marvel, I'm going to drag down the Marvel ranking. I think all my Marvel numbers are amazingly low in comparison to the rest of the team, because there's just I'm sorry, but there's just so much on that list. Not only is there, just the fact of Disneyland reopening, but there's, Snow White, Enchanted Wish. There's the Encanto. There's Luca, WandaVision. It's just broad range. There were a couple of them I had to go look them up because I'd forgotten what they were. And then once I looked them up, I was like, oh yeah, I was excited when I heard about that. But
the hardest part is to get excited again about something you were excited about last year at this time. So
like Avenger Campus?
Right, yeah, it's like, yeah, I was excited about that, but I feel like it wore off. Not that it won't come again, but like Black Widow. I love Marvel, but I already did my excitement for Black Widow, and it just didn't come. And now I'm like, I just kind of feel like, am I ready to have my heart broken again? Like, can I get excited about it?
Oh. You're like the person who shows up for the date, and oh, sorry, something came up, I couldn't make it, let's rebook, and you're like, will you actually show up? You stood me up before.
What about you, Rebecca?
Okay, I'm going in-house. I'm really looking forward to New Year's Eve. I'm sorry, but I am excited.
I would like to thank Radio Disney, may it rest in peace, for coming up with this idea, at least for making it known to me, because I'm old and I don't want to stay up till midnight.
I loved the New Year's Eve that they had at Disney's California Adventure one year, and then we also got to experience a New Year's Eve back at Animal Kingdom, because since it always closed at 6, they would have a New Year's Eve. So I am very, very excited for our fun, because it's always great when our team gets together. We have a great bunch of Disney nerds and geeks, and we always end up busting our sides laughing.
I'm curious to see if Disney will, because the parks are all closing before midnight, which is probably a great idea. But I'm curious to see if they'll do like a live stream of last year. I mean, a live recorded stream. I know that sounds stupid, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, so that you can watch
like
it.
last year's New Year's fireworks. That at midnight we can still have a Disney experience, even though none of us can be there in person.
Do you remember seeing Disneyland's countdown when they would launch the up to the Matterhorn?
No, I never.
Before your era.
So I've never, because of what I did, I never really got to experience New Year's Eve at the parks.
Okay.
One year I went to DCA because I worked it. I don't know what happened, but most of the time I was working, and so the actual midnight moment was your break because you had, the setup, but then nothing happens at midnight. Like, everyone's just watching fireworks. So that's when you would like drink water and change your socks and shoes, and then you would go back out to deal with the craziness of everyone leaving.
Right.
So I mean, that's why it's like, I don't know how to celebrate New Year's Eve anymore. I mean, basically since I was 18, I just worked, and I still have like guilt. I mean, maybe this year I won't have it because the park's not open, but like you can't like call your friends. You're like, dude, I'm working. What are you doing? Why are you calling me?
Well, that's funny. No, one of my favorite Disneyland countdowns. They would do the countdown of the numbers, and then as the final seconds would tick, it from Frontierland up towards the Matterhorn, this firework would travel along that wire, and when it would hit the Matterhorn, then it would change into the next year number. It had the previous year's number, then it would change into the next year's number. It was very cool. Yeah, no, it was super awesome.
New Year's Eve will be one of those things I never experienced at the parks. I have no interest. I mean, just based on my life, but I almost regret it that I won't experience it. But the thought of me going, there's no place. 364 days. Well, 363 days of the year, there's nowhere else I'd rather be than a Disney park. But on 4th of July and New Year's Eve, I have a little too much post occupational scars to have any interest in being there. It's also a little weird because like New Year's Eve, once like illumination, or I'm sorry, whatever the nighttime entertainment is, whether it's the fireworks show or back when they had nighttime parades, like it just becomes a dance party. Like there's nothing Main Street about it. It's just a dance party with a DJ, and it's fun and it's exciting, but it's not a very Disney experience except that it's a party.
One of my favorite memories of when the parks would be super open super late like that is around 1 or 2 in the morning, depending on how late Disneyland was open. We'd gather together and we'd end up with enough adults that we could fill an entire Dumbo, and we would all have bubble wands. And when the attraction would start, we would all have our little bubble wands out, and so we would just fill the air with bubbles, and it made us all very happy. And the cast members got such a kick out of it. And yeah, we would do that. So
one year I worked at Animal Kingdom, so we were closed. So we didn't know. It was my first year actually at Disney World. So a bunch of my Animal Kingdom friends were like, "What are we gonna do?" I'm like, "Well, we'll go see a movie." Like, because we could. I think we picked up shifts like giving out hats and horns. And then we're like, "What do we do now?" So like, we'll go see a movie. Going to see a movie at Downtown Disney, as it was back then, during New Year's Eve is a terrible idea because at midnight you can't hear the movie for like 15 minutes. So it's just watching, and then boom, 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 boom. I guess as Central Florida explodes.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
We lived across the. Well, you know this. We lived across the highway from Downtown Disney. The apartment we were in was right there near the Gaylord Palms. And the first year we lived there, we could stand on our patio and we could see the fireworks from Old Town, from Studios, from Epcot, from Pleasure Island. And then what I didn't expect was shortly after there was like this smoke, and the firework sulfur and everything. It just kind of wafted over the area like like the death angel in Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments. It was amazing, but wow, I missed that. Being able to stand on that patio and just do this pan of all. Oh, and even Celebration would have its own fire. I mean, it was just, it was good stuff. Good stuff. I love fireworks. I love the smell of sulfur. It was awesome.
You should love California. So our next LP in depth next Sunday, 7 p.m. Pacific. We're going to pick 20. We're going to go through 21 things we're looking forward to. 21 things coming from the Walt Disney Studios in 2021. Originally, I planned on going through the entire Walt Disney Studios slate, but then they sent me the slate and it has like 40 things on it. And, we all got things to do. So we're going to go through the 21 things that I think are the most interesting from the Walt Disney Studios. Actually, I should correct myself. It's no longer called the Walt Disney Studios, but the Disney Studio Content Group. And we'll figure out whether it's Disney Plus or theaters or whatever it's on. We'll go through it, share some clips, and share our thoughts on it.
And just so you don't miss any of the exciting stuff happening here at Laughing Place YouTube channel, be sure to like and subscribe to the stream. Then you'll get a notification whenever we go live. Or you can follow us on Twitter. And we announce these kinds of streams there as well. Laughing_place is where you can find us at Twitter. And as always, go check out Ben's article. He wrote up a nice little article highlighting each of the individuals that we talked about in this stream. I'll toss it back to you, Ben.
Oh, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Rebecca, for coming back.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
And we'll see everyone next week. Bye, everybody.
Okay.